Chapter 16, Lesson 4, The Plains Wars. So now we're getting into what then happened to the Native Americans during this time period. And it's kind of sad. So the homelands of the Native Americans were gradually destroyed really since the 1860s by the Transcontinental Railroad and other railroads. Buffalo hunting had shrunk the population from millions to less than 1,000. So really it just destroyed their way of life, especially for the Plains Indians like the Lakota that relied so heavily on the buffalo. They also lost a lot of land to homesteaders who just basically came in and claimed land. Plains Wars were really that last attempt to keep the land and their way of life. In terms of the homelands, homesteaders were given property rights, so they actually owned the land, and most Native Americans did not really believe that land could be owned in that same way. So they didn't believe the same sort of concept. So that sets up a problem when one group believes you can own land and another group believes you can't. The U.S. had brokered a lot of treaties with the Native Americans, and they'd broken them repeatedly, all the time it seems. They'd negotiate something and then they'd take it away when they found something on that land that they wanted. They said they would not take land, and then they gave it to homesteaders. They decided eventually to move most Native Americans to reservations. They thought that they could change a lot of them to farmers, but a lot of them didn't want to be farmers, and that would totally have changed their way of life. And there's actually acts where they tried to go ahead and make it so that Native Americans were more like Europeans and took them away from families and then had them educated in schools as if they were European Americans. And so it was really kind of a sad, messed up situation where it really was about robbing the Native Americans of their traditional culture. And eventually, Native Americans have had enough. This is over a long period of time where these things would come up a bit at a time in terms of the battles, but Native Americans and settlers clashed pretty regularly because when you move into a place that isn't, that someone else believes is theirs, yeah, you're going to have a problem with it. Soldiers eventually are sent there, actually pretty early on, to protect the settlers. And when I say protect, I mean they're there to make it so the settlers can get there as well. So in some cases it's to protect, and in some cases it's to lead the settlers in. And Native Americans lost most of the battles. And this whole series is called the Plains Wars, and this is you can see all these like little red dots here. These were major battles that took place. Up here is Little Bighorn. Here's the route that Chief Joseph took, which we'll talk. So he makes his way, attempts to make his way all the way up to Canada, but doesn't quite make it. Settlers in this time period go from about 200,000 to about 1.4 million in 20 years worth of time. And the Native Americans just did not have enough people to hold them back, or the technology. And when the troops come in, that's just really a hard time. Now, in 1868, the Native Americans and the U.S. government had come up with something called the Fort Laramie Treaty, which guaranteed the Lakota ownership of the Black Hills in South Dakota. And this is viewed as incredibly sacred land to the Lakota for a lot of reasons. And eventually, though, a group escorted by General Custer has photographers, miners, different groups there, surveyors, and they find gold. And suddenly 15,000 miners rush in and start trying to dig gold out of the ground, and that really just signals the end of the ownership of that land by the Lakota in a lot of ways. Now the government offered to buy this land, but the Lakota refused. And so then the government, well, they just said, well, you know what, we offered you a deal and you didn't take it, so now we're just ordering you off the land. Some of the Lakota were led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. They were joined by the Arapaho and Cheyenne, some of them, and they joined together to fight. Now Custer was one of the main people who was trying to more or less herd the Native Americans, the Lakota, onto a reservation, and the Native Americans were not agreeing to do that. So Custer attacked the camp without proper intelligence, and this is actually an image of one of the Native Americans came up with afterwards. You can see lots of soldiers that are dead, U.S. soldiers. That's pretty accurate in a lot of ways to what happened, because Custer, this was the last mistake he'd ever make. His men were eventually beaten, sorry about the misspelling, beaten and then surrounded, and basically they were killed. Custer's last stand was the last major Native American victory. And really, the U.S. responded by sending more troops and forcing Plains Indians to reservations. This is a picture of Crazy Horse over there. Sitting Bull tried to escape to Canada for a while, but then he returned and eventually went to a reservation. And later on went into a Wild West show, actually. Crazy Horse surrendered, and later he died when someone who was guarding him actually bayoneted him. And supposedly he was trying to escape, but I don't know. That seems kind of bogus, dying in custody. Now, this guy here, his name is Chief Joseph, and he makes one of the more sad statements. And he lived in an area in Oregon. And if you go back a couple of slides, you remember that path I told you. And he was told that his group had to move and leave to go to Idaho, and they refused. And eventually they try and escape to Canada. They make it pretty close, within about 40 miles, but they don't make it all the way there. And then they were sent to a reservation, and they sent them a lot further away, actually to Kansas. And he actually has this line where he promises that he will fight no more forever. Just sounds really, really depressing, because it is. And the Native Americans were taken out of the environments they were used to and forced to live in areas that they were not used to, given small amounts of the poorest land. You can see this is a map of the 2010 Native American reservation system. Purple areas are where the reservations are. Some people, like Helen Hunt Jackson, realized that Native Americans were being treated wrongly. She wrote a book called The Century of Dishonor, and just listed some of the horrible things that happened, just bad treatment. Jackson later on went to work at the California government with Native American affairs. The last battles were really fought and were forced, and the Native Americans were forced to move on to reservations, and this a lot of years of hardship and really tough times. There's been some improvement in recent years, but still it's pretty rough in terms of the degradation of the culture and the attempted basically making it so that Native Americans didn't really have much of a culture during the late 19th century, and almost a campaign of extermination on some level. So that's it.